hemisphere of the brain, right? We can see that. Do you guys want to do functional areas of the brain first, or go into lobes, go into
whatever you want?
Whatever I want.
Do you want to go down
All
the
right,
list?
let's do lobes, huh?
Do you want to go down the list?
Well, you guys have to ask me. You guys have to narrow down what you guys want to learn.
I say go down the list.
Yeah. Okay. We'll just continue.
What's first on the
Yeah, but it's
list?
not all on that.
Yeah, that's good.
We'll just whatever.
Okay, so the first one on the list is the cerebral hemispheres. So this is the right hemisphere of the brain. We know all the hemispheres are corresponding with the bones. So we have frontal hemisphere, frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. Pretty simple, right? So we're done with the lobes. We're gonna know the fissures and sulcuses. So there's only two fissures we have to know. The longitudinal fissure separates the two hemispheres of the brain, right down the middle, and the transverse fissure. This is what's going to separate the cerebellum from the cerebrum. We don't have the cerebellum, so we can't see that. And there's three sulcuses that we have to know. The central sulcus, it's the main guideline. Then we're going to have the parietal occipital sulcus, which is going to separate the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe. And then the lateral sulcus. And this is going to separate the temporal lobe from the frontal lobe. So we have two fissures, three sulcuses. What sulcus is this?
Central.
Good. What sulcus is this? Lateral sulcus. What fissure is this? Very good. What fissure is this? Very good. All right. So we've done. So the parietal occipital is just roughly where the parietal lobe and occipital lobe are.
Oh, okay.
Good. So what's next on this? I think we skipped too far. But we can't see a lot of this. So let's go.
Or is it this one?
The insula, we would have to peel back the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe. So we can't see it right here, but if I take this guy apart, you can see it right here on the inside.
So this is the insula?
Right there, the insula.
Wait, come back here. Where is it?
This is the insula.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So now let's do the functional areas. So the cortexes, or the functional areas, coming anteriorly off the central sulcus. The first area is going to be the primary motor cortex. The primary motor cortex function is to initiate action or movement. Anterior to that, we're going to have the premotor cortex. The premotor cortex is responsible for planned movement.
So the yellow part.
Yeah, the yellow part over here would be the premotor cortex. It plans the movement. Yeah. Premotor cortex plans the movement. That's going to communicate to the primary motor cortex, which is going to cause the action. Roughly in the anterior and superior part of that premotor cortex, we would have the frontal eye field. The frontal eye field is responsible for the movement of our eyeballs. Not the vision, but the actual movement of the eyeballs. And because this is the right hemisphere of the brain, we won't have Broca's area. Broca's area is only found in the left hemisphere. Just remember that. Going back posteriorly of the central sulcus, the first cortex we're going to have is the primary somatosensory cortex. Primary somatosensory cortex is going to be for the first sensory input we get from our body. I feel something from my right arm, Then we're going to have, behind that, we're going to have sensory association. It's going to go further into detail what we feel. I feel a sharp, hot pain on the right arm. See, it goes further into detail. So that would be the sensory association area. We go on the most posterior end, we're going to have primary visual cortex. This is going to be our rough visual input. I see something big and green. As we go, it's going to communicate into the visual association area. That big green thing is a tree. That's where it's going to analyze and categorize our prior experiences of what we saw. At the edge of the temporal lobe, we're going to have the primary auditory cortex. This is going to be for rough sound input. I hear a loud noise. And then auditory association is posterior to that. That loud noise is music. A rule of thumb, all the associations border each other. So if you remember that all the associations border each other, and all the edges are going to be the primary sensation of that cortex, whether it be auditory, somatosensory, or visual. That's just a good tidbit to know. So we're done with motor areas. Let's go into structures now. So unfortunately, we're missing the brainstem, so we can only see like 2 structures here.
Here's a stem.
Oh, okay.
That's it. Thank you.
Let's put this inside.
Sorry, thank you.
Alright. This isn't the one for this model, but I'll make it do. So here we can see the corpus callosum. What type of tract would the corpus callosum be? It's the largest commissural tract. This is what's going to cause lateralization or communication between both hemispheres. Then we're going to have a thin tissue right here called the septum pellucidum. Now we don't see it on the model, but it will be covering here. And that will be separating the lateral ventricles. So we can see the lateral ventricles here. Underneath the corpus callosum, then we have the fornix. And underneath the fornix, we have the thalamus. Inside the thalamus, connecting the 2 hemispheres of the thalamus, we have that intermediate mass, or the interthalamic adhesion. It's also another commissural tract. Right here, number 17. As we go inferior to the thalamus, we're going to have the hypothalamus. And then hypothalamus, connecting that, we'd have the pituitary gland, which is this guy right here. What connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus is the infundibulum. Doesn't show here, it's not too accurate. As we go posterior to the thalamus, we're going to have the pineal gland. What type of hormone is secreted from the pineal gland? Regulates the menstrual cycle and the circadian rhythm. Huh?
Estrogen.
Not estrogen.
Testosterone?
Melatonin. Estrogen is secreted in the ovaries, but melatonin is what's going to...
Make you sleepy?
Huh?
That's the one that makes you sleepy.
It makes you sleepy, yeah. It's the one that's also the sleep aid supplement. That's going to be secreted by the pineal gland. It's also going to help regulate onset of puberty. Inferior to the pineal gland, we're going to have these 2 bumps. This is the corpora quadrigemina, separated into the superior colliculi and the inferior colliculi. The superior and inferior colliculi have their own functions. These are what's going to regulate reflexes. The superior colliculi is going to be visual reflex. The inferior colliculi is auditory reflex. That's all there is to remember on that. Go further down into the brainstem. We can see the pons here. Here we can see the medulla. On the anterior view, we would have been able to see the pyramids. Lateral to that, we have the olives. As we go in the back, here we have the 4th ventricle, the cerebellum. These ridges on the outside of the cerebellum are known as the folium, or foliage of a tree. In the middle, where the white matter would be, we'd have the arbor vitae. We don't see it because it's not colored. And then everything else that would be gray would be the cortex of the cerebellum. If the cerebellum still had its 2 hemispheres, we'd be able to see a thin strip. What would that be called? Vermis. Very good. It would be the vermis.
That's all we know.
That's all.
I think that's it that we can see.
Okay.
Okay.
Yay, thank you.